One of the biggest challenges we face now is to actually change what people think about when they hear, hey, I'm in recovery. And we have to collectively build those stories together to create a new narrative that's not the empty bottle, that's not the wasted pills, that's not the hypodermic needle. We need to create that new narrative, create that new story, because the old one's definitely not working right now.
And so I think it's just kind of like putting people who have started telling their story and people who are scared to tell their story in a room, and like, let's let that be a conversation first, so that then like, because yeah, once people hear it, even people who, again, like don't think they're touched by addiction, don't think they know anybody in recovery, when they hear the story of someone in recovery, it's just like human. Just everybody knows what it's like to long for something. Everybody knows what it's like to hurt. Everybody knows what it's like to make mistakes because you're hurting. And that's like fundamentally what it's about.
Inside and outside of our field, there's a lot of stigma around substance use disorder. Folks have this automatic thought of what a person in recovery looks like. So they think about needles and pills and empty alcohol bottles and this sullen image of someone looking at a bottle and the lights receding from the back of their head, and they're thinking, should I drink today or should I not? Recovery's not like that.
Stigmas in recovery are twofold, I think. For me, from the general community, I think some of it is a lack of perception and a lack of knowledge as to who and what people in recovery are. Even from my own family. You know, I remember when I was about a year into my recovery and I came back home, and my grandfather, who has saved my life, you know, even him being someone who experienced years of my journey, asked me one time, he says, so how long do you have to do this whole recovery thing? Like, even he didn't understand that it's a lifelong process for someone like me.
I think stigma is a big component to why people don't seek help and why they don't even admit they have a problem. Whether anyone came out and said it, there's a judgment that comes with it. Maybe they feel like my son came from a bad family, or I did something wrong as a mother, or, you know, how could you let your child go down that road?
Stigma is still so real. Bias against addiction is real. And the shame that people feel when they don't want to talk about addiction, when they're afraid to talk about addiction, that is all so real. So we have a long way to go on stigma, bias, and shame.
You can go to church and people in your church are in long-term recovery. You can go to the grocery store. Your neighbors are in long-term recovery. It is all around us. And so from an understanding perspective, I think the stigma's gone away a lot. And mindsets have changed, certainly here in the State House, but there's still obviously a long way to go too. And it's a constant battle.
When I think about the stigma in relation to substance use disorders, I really start to think about how mental health conversations have changed over the last 10 to 15 years. It used to be that people who were living with mental health conditions weren't talked about. In many cases, they were kind of swept to the side, even in family relationships. And over the last 10 to 15 years, we've changed that conversation. You regularly see commercials, you regularly see news articles, all of these different resources that are out there changing the language, changing the conversation around mental health. And through doing that, we've opened doors to mental health services for so many people who might not have been able to get that help before. As long as we have these high levels of stigma that are pervasive throughout our community, we're closing doors for people. We're not opening doors for people to find their pathway towards recovery.
I think when I first got here 5.5 years ago, there was a lot of stigma. And so recovery was a word you whispered. And I said, we don't have to whisper that. We have students in recovery here. We can say that out loud. There was a lot of belief that students in recovery were in crisis and were struggling and needed constant support. And sharing some of the success stories, having people come and talk about I'm in recovery. This is what my life looks like. I'm not in crisis 24/7. Helped to shift some of those beliefs.
And I think those stigmas went away when, hey, that could be my child, or hey, that is my child, or hey, that's my husband, who had the nice middle-class income in the nice suburbs, and he's addicted to opioids. So I think people are looking at these things are different. And that's the thing we got to look at. The stigma now is all about, hey, let's see how we can make these people productive citizens.
Recovery to me is just the process of becoming more spiritually fit and becoming a better individual and helping others. That's been my journey through my recovery, and constantly learning new things and how to evolve as a person, as an individual. My disease doesn't define who I am. And if we all have the power to share our experiences, positive and negative, then we're able to grow.
Lots of my family, most of my extended family, had no idea that the journey that I've been on up until we lost my brother. The addiction doesn't make the person. Recovery is a lifesaver.
A lot like many kids who kind of start using it was sort of slow. We found something here, found something there, had the conversations, and we as a family struggled with it a great deal because we really didn't know what to do. We were confused, we were embarrassed, we were afraid, we were ashamed. We were all the things that I think a lot of people are when they're dealing with an issue like this. When we battled cancer, everybody we knew brought food to our house. They came and helped us in our yard. They were supportive, they were loving. Unfortunately, when you're battling a substance misuse issue in your home, people are afraid. They don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, and so they tend to not show up sometimes.
I grew up, it was just me and my mom and my two sisters. So we had our own struggles and things coming up, and my mom went through a lot in raising us. And I always had desires and dreams and passions to make my mom and even my sisters proud, because they ended up really thriving through, the hard work my mom put in. And I was kind of like this outcast. And so from that, when I'll never forget when I went to the last treatment center that I stayed sober from, I told my sister, this is embarrassing. Like, I remember bringing y'all and being there when you guys were going to college, and mom's dropping me off at a treatment center. And she said, Justo, this is way more vital. This is way more important than us going to college. She said, if I didn't go to college, I would have still been all right. I could have made it. She was like, but this is your life. And so in that moment, I was like, all right, I got to make it happen this time. And so from there, everything that took place, to try to just rebuild those relationships and take the steps to become a better person and making them proud was probably my proudest moments.
I had dreams, So I had two choices. One, go back to the life that I knew that had failed me, or try something new. The seed was planted. I've never felt as good and confident in myself ever than I do today.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about recovery. There's so many things that I value. There's my family, there's my education, there's my friends. I value every single thing. The good and the bad. Because even though there's still bad littered in there, it kind of helps me grow as a person. Whereas before when I was in addiction, if it was bad, it was just so terrible and emotional and stuff like that. Like I have a daughter, I have a 2-year-old. I have a wife who's also in recovery as well. And, having a family was something that we always wanted, but we could never do, because I can never, be a good partner in a relationship. Now, I kind of get to see my daughter grow. I get to see my wife, grow as a person and as a mother, so there's so many things that I value today.
Courage Center, we've seen lives changed. We've seen families changed. We've seen people who have gone with no hope to having a future. And we learned through this process is that we have partners. There's a community that's all coming together to help us in this fight and to help us help other people.
We're going to meet with treatment providers. We're going to meet with first responders. We're going to meet with government agencies. We're going to meet with legislators. We're going to meet with colleges. We're going to meet with everyone who plays a significant role in how we build and shape the view of recovery in South Carolina.
You know, using a social model of recovery, it's people living together that have a common goal to move forward in their recovery, to hold each other accountable. It's also a great time for them to seek additional services in recovery, whether they're getting some peer support, some therapeutic services, job training, and even working with some faith-based providers. They're people just like you and me who are trying to better themselves within their own community.
We have to remember that hundreds of thousands of people are in recovery in the state, almost 400,000 people in recovery, and we have to pause and celebrate that as well. There's really just a continuum of need there. What brings me hope and what drives me every day is that we're developing such a strong response and such strong systems, particularly with our recovery community organizations like the Courage Center, that really draw out the resilience of individuals to build stronger communities.
Pain is pain, and hope is hope. And if we share, the more we have in common, the faster we're going to get things done. And the only way to understand what we have in common is to say it. Is to just open our mouth and say it. We need to start talking about things that matter.
And I honestly, Brock, sharing stories. You were one of the first students to share your story with a room full of administrators who'd never been to a recovery meeting before. And that experience and sharing the personal experiences of people in recovery helped us to change people's attitudes and beliefs about what recovery looked like in a college student. You know, that personal storytelling is what helped make a difference for us.
This has got enough.
That was just a breakthrough for us to realize that we were here to facilitate, not really to lead or guide, but to facilitate and to nudge and to help students become the persons that they already were, to give them that confidence to be successful, both in the classroom and their own well-being.
So one of the things that happens when we normalize conversations around any disease or any common dilemma is that we have more conversations, we come up with more plans, and we begin to develop innovative strategies to address those. For instance, when we started talking about chronic conditions like diabetes and hypertension, we came up with lots of different strategies. And we know that substance use disorders have similar outcomes to individuals who have diseases or conditions like diabetes and hypertension, but we don't talk about those in the same way. Instead, we talk about the negative aspects of substance use disorders rather than the positive aspects of helping people find recovery and sustain that recovery over the rest of their lifetime.
We wanted to make sure that folks normalize people in recovery and look at them as a human experiencing a human condition.
We have to educate on all levels. And that education has to reach from schools to churches, the pastors in the churches, anybody who has influence, our legislators, they need to be educated. And once we're educated on what is the problem, then we can solve it.
We love the idea of educating parents, youth, other groups, including like law enforcement, that addiction is a disease and there are treatments, and certainly recovery is a big part of that. We have to have it in front of people's faces a lot, I think, that this is a part of our society and many people struggle with addiction. So what can we do to educate ourselves and also to make sure that we have skills and know how to interact in those situations.
This cuts across so many spectrums. It is not a blue or a red issue or a black versus white. It's very much everybody is affected by this, and so the job is not done. And it's both a local, state, federal, and community issue. So it takes really collectively all of us in different ways pulling together. But from a policy initiative in the State House, there's a tremendous focus on this issue and has been for the last several years.
A lot of folks are really willing to really lay bare a lot of their life and what's going well now. But when we think about telling that story to people that we can't assume get it, I think that's where it's still a little bit challenging, because there's still a little bit of that hiccup where I do think students on our campus right now aren't looking at people as if they're a failure, but they aren't quite sure what it looks like to say, I need to cut back or I need to be sober. And so taking that step, I think, is where we have the next little piece of the journey.
Part of that is having conversations, having real conversations about addiction, about recovery, and celebrating recovery, celebrating the successes is another way that we're going to overcome some of that stigma.
I am a person in recovery from substance use disorder. About 25 years ago, a group of folks who I did not know, who had no vested interest in me at all, said, we understand what you're going through, let us help you. And a couple years after that, I was working in food service, but it was like a life unfulfilled. And I'm like, I gotta do something. And I decided to get into the field. So that's how I started, because I want to help people. And I had a rough start.
I'm a person in long-term recovery. I spent a little over 10 years in active use. And at the end of that 10 years, when I was very fortunate to be exposed to some people who helped me find recovery, I really felt a calling to dedicate my life's work to that. And so at that point in time, I went back and pursued higher education to really become an asset to the field, which is what I hope to always be.
I am a person in long-term recovery for the past 5 years, as a matter of fact, and I am the president of the board of the South Carolina Alliance for Recovery Residences.
So in thinking about recovery, my own personal recovery, because I am in long-term recovery, it's a circle, right? So it's not linear.
And I'm a person in long-term recovery. For me, that means being part of a community. It means being on top of my treatment and my symptoms. I came to recovery through mental health treatment, mental health recovery, but sobriety has been a major part of that for me.
I think the more that we have people who are really committed to the cause, the more we can develop the services and the programs that are needed to support people in their journey towards recovery.
There was a sort of gap that I didn't really know that I was experiencing when I was doing mental health recovery and mental health advocacy, that so much of the focus was on asking for help and getting treatment that we didn't really talk about what a sustained life of change looks like. And so as I came into this job, came into this role in this community, I'm just that is what kept me here. That's what not just the doorway, but that's what I'm doing here is how do we have that conversation? How do we talk about what we're doing every day to have a different kind of life, a more meaningful life?
But here's the hope. The hope is when we have those meetings with DHEC, when we have those meetings with the opioid response team, we hear about the reversals. I think we do need to do a better job of reporting on those reversals, of reporting on those successes, and just showing folks that there are many, many more successes. Because when we touch one individual, that individual touches a family, individual touches a school, a ministry, an industry. So we can't really quantify that, but we know what's happening. We just have to find a better way to show that hope.